Hello and a very warm welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with me. I'm your host, Rosie Moss. Every week I bring you a story from the forefront of widowhood, where my guests come on and they tell me how their partner died, who their partner was, and how they've rebuilt their life afterwards. And it is an enormous honour to do this. Today I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Natalie Dodds. Hello Natalie, how are you?
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's lovely to see you.
And you.
So, Natalie, I know a little bit about your story, and what I'm hoping is that you're going to tell me a lot more. So, I know that your partner, Dave, he died in a work accident, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
A sudden shock, and you're a mum as well. So, how many children do you have?
Two
children.
So they're now 20 and 18. They were 11 and 10 at the time of the accident.
So I'm hoping that you're going to have some really kind of helpful advice as well for people who are supporting grieving children, because you've got that benefit of hindsight, of experience, and like me, you know, I'm coming up to 8 years widowed as well, and you know, we don't get it right all the time, but we do pick up a little bit of knowledge along the way. I hope.
Yeah, I think there's lots that if you could go back and change, you possibly would.
But you can't, can you? And that's one of the things you have to accept. No. You know, we talk acceptance is a big one, right, for widows. So,
and I think that's what's hard. You're grieving, but you're also trying to support children that are grieving.
Oh my God, yeah. So the kind of analogy of putting your aeroplane oxygen mask on first, it doesn't really apply in grief, does it? Because you have to protect them first. You sort of put all of your pain and all of your anguish on the back burner while you support them. But of course, we know there's nowhere to hide in grief. It comes and gets you eventually. So tell me about Dave. Tell me how you guys met. Tell me what kind of a man he was.
Okay. So we met in 2000. Dave worked with my best friend, so she introduced us.
It's all her fault then.
Yeah. I blame her for everything. I always used to blame her if we had an argument. I'd be like, it's your fault.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So we met, we went on our first date on St. Patrick's Day. We chatted before on the phone and stuff. And I think it all moved really quickly from that date. He'd just bought a house in Northampton, so I was always at his. And then he worked over where I live. So it just came to the fact we were always at my mum's.
Lucky mum.
So So she was like, had me still and him, which she didn't mind. And then so we decided to sell his house in Northampton and stay with my mum until we found a house that we wanted. So we bought our first house in April 2021, which we're still in. And I think life just, we knew we wanted to be together. We knew we wanted children. We knew sort of mapped it all out really. So we started trying for a baby, and it took a long time for me to fall pregnant. I think it was like 18 months or something. And I fell pregnant, and we had sexing scans and stuff, found out it was a little girl. So got everything ready for her arrival, and then sadly found out at just over 38 weeks that she had died.
Oh, Natalie.
So that was crap because obviously at 38 weeks and 6 days, you still have to give birth.
Oh my goodness. And that's, oh God, the thought of this, that's a baby. That's a real life baby.
And she was perfect when she came out. There was absolutely nothing wrong. They still never found a cause as to why it happened.
Natalie, can I ask you what your baby's name was?
She was called Emily. So she was Emily Daisy.
And were you able to? Sorry, I know this is not what you're here to talk about.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
When you gave birth to Emily, that must have been incredibly, literally painful. You know, it's birth. But to go through all of that pain and to not have an alive baby at the end of it, to know that what you're going to bring into the world is not going to take her first breath, she's not going to cry. No. That must have been incredibly hard.
It was awful. Because as you say, you know your baby isn't going to cry.
Was there a little bit of you that was thinking maybe?
No. Because we'd seen the scan, and she was literally, when they scanned and found out, she was literally just curled up in a ball in my tummy. So you knew we knew we'd sort of accepted, but it was still hard.
And was Dave a big support to you through this?
He was. He really struggled with it though, and I don't think you ever get over it anyway. But
and men are often a bit overlooked in
yes.
birth.
Yeah, and at the time, the hospital that we gave birth at didn't have a bereavement suite or anything, so you're on the main ward. Delivery unit listening, and you could hear babies crying, and it was just like, our babies are going to cry.
That sounds agony.
So it was awful. I do a lot now for SANS, the stillbirth charity, so I do support meetings for them twice a month and do loads of stuff for them. So it's giving my bit back.
But that's what you do when something terrible happens to you. You find a way to make it a little bit less terrible for somebody else.
Yes, and that's all that you can hope to do.
Yeah.
So it was a really, really rubbish time, but we were really fortunate that we fell really quickly again. So Emily's first anniversary, I'd got Maisie in my arms. Not that it's not a replacement, it's just you can go on and you can have children.
And you've got someone to pour all that love in.
Yeah. And then we decided after we had Maisie that we were like, right, let's try again. So 20 months later, I think it was, Charlie came along.
Wow.
And I was like, that's it.
Yeah, you're done now.
Not doing it again. Yeah, I was like, I'm not doing it again. And Dave was he worked really hard. He worked weekends, he worked long hours. I was fortunate enough to be at home with them. But when he was here, he was a really hands-on dad. He would, he'd taken Charlie to rugby, he'd go to scouts. I think the week of the accident, he'd gone to Maisie. On the Monday night, he'd gone with Maisie to her scouts group because they were doing like a shooting thing. And he went and did that with her. So I'm really grateful.
Real hands-on dad.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that they've got the memories of him doing things with them.
Yeah.
As well, because I think that's really important. So we had a caravan, we had a dog, we used to go off weekends in the caravan and stuff, and as the children were growing up, so we've got lovely memories. And then 2017 hit, and Dave's dad unfortunately was diagnosed with a brain tumour the April. So he rang us Easter, I think it was, and said that he'd got this stage 4 brain tumour, there was nothing they could do. And he deteriorated very quickly. He was in and out of hospital and stuff. And then on the Friday in June, they moved him into the hospice in Northampton. And we all went over as a family on the Sunday. So all the sort of grandchildren and Dave's brother and sister and stuff, we all went over and spent some time with him. And then Dave went to work on the Tuesday, and he always messaged wherever he got. Oh no, it wasn't. It was the Wednesday. So he always messaged. He'd got the kids the night before because I was at college. So he'd sort of put them to bed, and he'd sent me a jokey message going, I've put the kids in bed, told them they stank, gave them a bath and stuff. And it's typical Dave, what he was like. So he's like, I won't see you. I'll be asleep when you get in. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Might not be home tomorrow night. The job's like in Crewe, but I'll let you know. So, and that was the norm.
And what was it he did for work?
So he was an electrician for a crane company.
Okay.
So he started off working for a hoist company. But so he's always worked in that industry. He'd always worked at heights and stuff. So that's what he'd done.
And you just take it as part of what they do. You don't think about danger and things, do you?
No. And he, as I say, he worked long days. So I was used to him leaving at sort of 4:30 in the morning or 5 and not getting home. Sometimes he'd been home early, other times he wouldn't be home till sort of like 6ish. And so it just depended on the job. Unfortunately, there was a lot of travel as well.
Yeah.
So so he got up the next morning, went off to work. He always sent a message when he got to work. He'd always send a text message going, I'm here, sugar tits. That was his. So every morning. So I woke up to his message saying, I'm here, sugar tits, and that was that. And then
I like this because it gives me a real picture of who he was.
Yeah. So I went about my day, got the kids to school, went to work. I worked at a preschool at the time. So I went off to work and then came home, picked the kids up from school, and it was a really, really hot day. So the kids were playing in the garden and I was doing stuff. And I can remember I was sitting on the bedroom floor sorting a load of washing out. It's weird what you remember. And I'd got this like massive long nightshirt on because it was so hot, and I was sorting my washing out, and my phone went. My phone was on the bed, so I sort of went to pick my phone up and looked, and I thought, why is Dave ringing me from his personal mobile? He never rings from his personal mobile if he's at work. He always rings from his work mobile because it's connected to his van and stuff. So I thought he's probably ringing to say he's on the way to the hotel because he'd messaged earlier on and said, I definitely won't be home. So I answered the phone, and I can't remember how the conversation went, but it was a paramedic saying that he was in the back of an ambulance, and I needed to get to wherever she said. I couldn't remember. And I was literally like, is he okay? Is he okay? And I could hear him in the background. And I also thought, well, he's told her who to ring.
Yeah.
He's given her a passcode.
Yeah.
Because it was before Face ID. So I was like, he's told her the passcode. So he's alive.
He must be okay, right?
He's conscious. So she said, you need to get to, I couldn't remember at the time where she said, but she said Stoke-on-Trent Hospital. So I was like, right, okay.
And where
so
do you
I
live?
rang instantly near, so Cambridge.
Near Cambridge, wow, okay.
126 miles.
Okay, wow.
So I rang my mum, and I said to my mum, something's happened to Dave, can you come up and look after the kids? I said, and she was like, what's happened? I was like, I don't know. I said, I presume he's probably had a car crash, or I said, that's all I can think of, or fallen over on site. I was like, don't know. So she only lived a couple of streets away, so she came up and looked after the children, and I said to the kids, something's happened to Dad. I need to get to Stoke-on-Trent. As soon as I know more, I'll let you know. So literally, I got dressed and ran out the door, and I got in the car, and I was like, I can't even remember where I'm meant to be going. So I rang his phone back, and thankfully the paramedic answered, and I was like, I'm really sorry, I can't remember where you said. So she said, Royal Stoke Hospital. So I was like, okay. I was like, I'll be there then. So put the phone down, put it in the sat nav, and I was like, that's 126 miles away. And I'm not great with directions, so I was a bit, have I actually got the right place? Because it wouldn't have surprised me if I'd driven there.
Oh yeah, different Stoke.
Yeah, being somewhere completely different. So I rang her back and I was like, can I just confirm this is the postcode? And she was like, yes. I was like, okay, I'll see you in 2.5 hours then.
Oh my goodness.
So I literally set off, and I don't know, you just go into sort of autopilot. You're like, I need to get there, because everyone's like, why did you drive? And I was like,
what other choice did you have, right? In that moment, you just needed to get to him.
Fly. I couldn't catapult there. I know that's the only way I could do it, was to
What was the drive like? Were you able to have music or radio on, or was it just silence?
I think I had the radio. I did have the radio on, and I made a couple of phone calls en route. First, I phoned my boss to say I wouldn't be at work tomorrow.
You do weird things, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, I rang the babysitter to say I might need you tomorrow. Of all the people to ring.
Yeah, just to say, oh, by the way, I'm on my way to Stoke. Dave's had an accident. I don't think I'll be at work tomorrow. Yeah. And then I phoned Dave's brother, I think, who was at the hospice with his dad. He'd just visited there. So he was like, do you want me to come? And I was like, no, fine. I'm quite an independent, I'm okay person. So I was like, no, it's fine. I'll ring you when I get there and, let you know more.
And also at this point, he might have a broken leg, right?
Well, this is the thing. So I carried on, and I rang sort of a couple of friends and stuff, and I carried on, and the 7 o'clock news came on, and I was near Leicester. And it said there'd been a crane that collapsed in Crewe. 2 people had died at the scene, and 1 had been airlifted to hospital. And I was like, fuck, that's where he was working today. I was like, that's what's happened.
Oh my God, that's made the hairs go up on my arm.
So that's how I found out what had happened. So I then went into complete panic mode, because these cranes aren't little, they're huge, tall cranes. So I then went into a bit of a panic mode, and I phoned his brother back, who had just heard it. And he literally, as he answered the phone, he goes, I've just heard the news. He goes, you are not going any further on your own. He goes, pull over. He said, whereabouts are you? And I was like, I'm on the M1. I think
I'm somewhere.
Yeah, I'm somewhere. I was like, I'm near Leicester. So he's like, right, find somewhere. We'll leave now. He said, I think they were probably like half an hour or 40 minutes away. He said, we'll leave now, find somewhere, ring us and tell us where you are, or text us the postcode and we'll meet you there. He goes, I'll get Suzanne to drop me off and then I'll carry on with you. So I literally pulled off the motorway, and there was like a Brewers Fair sort of place. And I remember screeching in the car park, and I literally ran in, and they must have thought I was a freak, because I ran up to the bar and I was like, tell me your postcode, I need your postcode. And this bloke's just
poor barman's like, I don't know the postcode.
Yeah, and he was like, right, okay. So he gave me the postcode, so I texted it to Mark. And then I was like, right, I need to use the toilet. So I went and used the toilet. And felt really bad as well. I didn't buy a drink or anything. I was just like, I want your postcode and your toilet, and that's it.
I think niceties go out the window in this situation.
So I then went and got back in the car and was waiting for Mark to arrive. And my phone went, and it was Dave's best friend who also worked in the same industry. And he goes, I've heard the news. I know it's Dave. So obviously it was all getting round really quickly. And he's like, what's happened? I was like, I don't know anything. I said, literally, I got a phone call saying blah, blah, blah. I said, I've now heard the news. I said, I'm just waiting for Mark. I said, and then we're going to carry on. I said, so as soon as I know, I'll ring you. So he was like, right, okay. So Mark arrived and we carried on. And we got a bit further and my phone went, and Mark answered it because I hadn't got hands-free in the car. And it was the police. And they wouldn't talk to Mark because he wasn't listed as next of kin. I was. So Mark put it on loudspeaker and I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm in the car. We're driving to Stoke. It's fine to talk. So he said that Dave was alive. He had possibly life-changing injuries. But they'd basically wait until we got there. So I was like, right, okay. And he was like, I can't tell you much more than that. So we carried on. I think we got to the hospital about 9 o'clock. Literally, again, roared into the car.
So how many speeding tickets did you get up there?
Yeah, it wasn't until later, when we kept going back to the hospital, that we realised we'd gone in the ambulance entrance. Roared in the car park, parked. Literally, it's a bit like that scene from Gavin and Stacey where Ness is having the baby and they're running down the corridor. We were literally like that because we both needed the toilet and we were like, where's the toilets? So we went to the toilet and then we went to the desk and sort of said who we were, and she said, right, I'll get someone to come and see you. So a consultant came out and he was like, right, I'm going to take you through to a room. And we walked past resus and I could see there was a tiny crack in the curtain and I could see Dave laying just flat on his back, and I could see loads of people around him and wires and stuff, and I just wanted to get to him, but the consultant obviously wanted to talk to us. So he took us in a room and basically said that the crane had fallen 80 feet. Dave had managed to hold on to the cab at the end of the jib, so that had protected him. He was a big guy as well, so he said, for once I will say size is on his side. He said because he's big, he's protected his internal organs. He said he's broken all down one side. I want to say the right side, but I can't remember. He said he's got a small chip in his back. He said, but we're not overly worried about that, but his whole knee is going to need reconstructing. His arm, his elbow and everything will need reconstructing. He said he's quite battered. He said, but he's alive.
And that's, in that moment, that will be all that mattered, right? You'll be thinking, I don't care if he's bedbound for the rest of his life. I will wipe his bum. I don't care.
Exactly. He's alive.
Yeah.
And the other two, unfortunately, weren't. They had died at the scene.
Oh, my goodness.
So he said, I'll take you to see him. So I was like, right, okay. So we sort of braced ourselves and went in to see him, and he was a mess. Like, mentally, he was an absolute mess.
Was he conscious?
Like, what? Yeah. And he was like, why am I alive and they're dead? And I was like, Dave, I'm really, really sorry, but I'm grateful that you are.
Yeah.
And he would just keep bursting into tears, and then he would have a laugh and a joke, like he'd got a cut on his face, and he'd said to the nurses, he's like, when you stitch it, can you do it in zigzag so it looks like a shark's bit of me or something, like really, really good? And I was like, falling 80 foot from a crane isn't like good enough then.
Yeah. Not dramatic enough.
Yeah. No, it's not dramatic enough. You need to be bitten by a shark as well.
So he's kind of going from real low melancholy, hopelessness to almost like mania.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that was probably the drugs that they were pumping into him as well.
Shock.
Yeah. So we stayed with him for a little bit, and we kept getting sent out while they did things because they had to try and like pull his leg, so to straighten it and stuff like that, and then put it in a like not a cast, what do they call it, splint. So yeah, there was lots going on, and he'd said he'd got a hotel booked, and he was like, if you want to stay there tonight, you can. I don't know why he thinks of all these random things. It would have been his brother's birthday the next day as well. Yeah, so we just stayed with him for a bit, and we kept getting sent out. And I think I was angry because the way we'd found out, the fact the company hadn't even contacted us, the fact that they hadn't even offered lifts, they hadn't done anything.
And at this point, you've still heard nothing?
No. And I was like, I've driven 126 miles not knowing what I'm going to face. And it was an act, you know, as you say, it could have been a car crash, it could have been anything. So the company wouldn't have been at fault, but it happened on site. The company should have been in contact.
Absolutely,
and they should have got us.
Yeah.
They should have got us here, not left us to fend for ourselves to get here. So I was like, I want your phone. And he was like, why? And I said, because I'm going to phone your boss and give him a piece of my mind and tell him what I think. So he reluctantly gave it to me, and I did ring. And I think I made the bloke cry, because I was like, you know, you're despicable. I was like, I can't believe you've let us travel here. And I mean, they were all on site, but I was like, you could have sent a bloody taxi. You could have done something.
Or a phone call, you know, at the very least, a phone call.
Yeah. And I understand, you know, they've got to protect themselves because it was an accident and stuff like that.
But humanity surely trumps all of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've let me drive 126
and
miles.
hear about it on the radio.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's what got to me more.
Did just as an aside, the two people who tragically died in the accident, were their families made aware before it was on the radio? Do you know?
I think so.
Good.
So one of them had the police knock on the door. He was called Dave as well. He was 34. He lived with his mum. He'd got children, but he wasn't with the mother.
Yeah.
So he had gone back to his mum's. And she said, because we're all in contact, she said the door went. And she ran down the stairs going, oh, bloody hell, Dave, have you left your key again? And opened the door. Well, like you talk about.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's really familiar, yeah.
Yeah, and the police were standing there and they told her. Tragically, the other person that died, he was 18.
Oh, Natalie.
It was his first proper job, and he worked with his dad. So his dad watched the whole thing.
That
so
poor family.
The mum and dad weren't together, but his dad had to ring his ex-wife and say, Reese has died. And
that image that he'll never, ever be able to shake, will he?
No.
Poor guy.
Yeah, just absolutely heartbreaking. So we stayed with Dave, and they moved him to a ward early hours of the morning, and they said, we'll operate tomorrow on his leg. And we'll do his arm as well, and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, right, okay. So I said, I won't come up tomorrow, because it's obviously a long way to go. And I needed to be around
with the kids,
for
right?
the kids as well. And I was like, I can't sit with him while he has his operation. So I'm only going to be sitting somewhere in the hospital. So we drove home, and I think I got home, I want to say it was probably like 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning or something. And my mum went home, and I've sort of waited for the kids to get up and then to say to them, you know, he's broken, but they can fix him.
Down but not out, right?
Yeah, I've spoken to him and blah, 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 blah. And they went to school, and I sort of sat ringing various different people and thinking, God, you know, I need a solicitor. He's had an accident at work. I need this, I need that. And
really trying to keep your brain busy.
Yeah. And
Natalie, just let me ask you, at this point, so he's been in a very serious accident, but has anybody said to you that he might not make it? I'm just thinking about the fact that they're operating on his leg and his arm, so you wouldn't be doing that on somebody that didn't have a future, would you? Yeah, no, they hadn't. They'd all said, you know, they said he's got life-changing injuries. You know, his mobility won't be the same, but they hadn't said he wouldn't walk. They hadn't said anything that had happened was fixable. It just probably wouldn't work as well. And, you know, we had conversations over the time, like with his brother and stuff, and we were like, well, we can renovate the house, you know, we can do ramps, we can do this. Downstairs shower, all these things.
We can move the bedroom downstairs while he's recovering. We can, you know, there's so much that we can do. He's alive, that's all that matters. So, I didn't go up the next day. I think I spoke to him that evening, if I remember rightly, when he was in recovery, and the hospital were brilliant because they sort of kept us up to date with the ops. But the leg took a lot longer than they thought, so they didn't do the arm. So, that was that. And then on the Saturday, so that was the Friday, the Saturday, I went up with Dave's brother, Mark, sister-in-law, Suzanne, and his sister, Julie. We went up for the day. And he was in intensive care. He was quite jolly.
Yeah.
On and off. We dressed him up. Mark had got some capes and he'd got a Superman cape, so we dressed him up in this Superman cape. I mean, bless him, we took advantage. He's flat out in bed.
It could have been worse, couldn't it?
Exactly, can only move one arm, and we dressed him up and we were all taking pictures of him and like posting them on Facebook because we just wanted people to know he was okay.
Yeah.
Because so many people
and people
were
would have heard the news, wouldn't they, and be so worried.
And as horrible as I hate putting things on Facebook like that, but it's the only way. I was getting too many messages, phone calls and texts. It was just the easiest way. It's the easiest
way to let people, when John was poorly, I used to update once a day on Facebook, let people know what's happening, because otherwise you spend the entire evening individually messaging people. No, it has its faults, social media, but in times like that it can be really useful.
And it's draining. It's
it's exhausting.
So we were sort of putting things on social media and stuff. We were only allowed 2 in at a time with him, so we were sort of staying in the relatives' room and letting him in. So he had quite a long chat with his brother that day, and he was saying to his brother, he's like, I don't know what happened. He goes, I don't know what happened. He said, we slewed the crane like we always do. He said, and it just went. He said, but I don't know why. He said, I just don't know why. So he was obviously really puzzled about what had happened.
Yeah.
So we stayed with him. We then left the hospital and we went to the site on the way home because I needed to see the site.
I get it.
And so we put some flowers. There was a Morrison's opposite, so we went and got some flowers and we put some flowers down for the 2 lads that had died. And the security people came out, and because they were building a old people's home on the site, so that's why they needed a crane. So the security guards came out, and one of them was there when the accident happened, so we had a long chat with her. And then we came home, and then I didn't go up on the Sunday, and on the Monday I dropped the children off at school, and then I went up, and the company were coming out to see him that afternoon. So I sat with him, but he wasn't himself. He's not going to be himself, is he? But he was feeling really sick, and I'm such a crap nurse because I was trying to feed him and I was dropping stuff on him, and I was... Yeah,
it's a good job I never went into the medical profession. I'm not a good nurse.
Because he's literally flat on his back.
Yeah.
So trying to give him orange juice or yogurts or stuff that I was trying to do was really, really hard. And he's like, you're going to be crap when I come home. And I was like, yeah, I know. Oh, well.
I'm all you've got, mate, so suck it up.
You've got no other choice, mate. So it's me or nobody. So we had sort of a giggle about that, and I'd got a book with me, he was dozing on and off, and he'd got a nurse literally 24/7 at the end of his bed, and he was sound asleep, and I was reading my book, and he just went, Nat, and I was like, what? And he goes, sing with me. And I was like, Dave, you are in critical care. You cannot start singing. Because he was a massive singer.
I was going to say, was he a big singer?
Yeah, he was always singing at karaoke, so he would ring me and sing down the phone. There's videos I've got on Facebook that that he would like, he's singing away and then all of a sudden he goes, Red Lorry, and then just carries on singing again, and it's just random. When he finished work at Christmas, he'd always ring and sing, I'm driving home for Christmas.
Oh.
And I couldn't listen to that for years. I would just be like...
I bet.
So, yeah, and I was like, Dave, you can't sing, you're on critical care. And his little nurse was like, I think he was a Chinese guy, and he was like, no, go on, sing. So I was like, okay.
What did he sing?
Mustang Sally.
Did you get involved?
He's laying flat on his bed, and we're singing Mustang Sally.
I love that.
Yeah, so that was him singing away, and then he went back to sleep. So I stayed for a bit and then drove home, and... we sort of tried to take it in turns a little bit to go up because it was too much to go up every single day. So I wasn't going to go up on the Tuesday. His brother and sister-in-law were going up. So they went up and they rang and was like, he's really not right. He's in a lot of pain. He's feeling really sick and stuff. So I was like, right, okay. And then I can't remember if it was the Tuesday or the Wednesday, but I know they were like, you should come up. So, and I'd gone into work just for a bit of normality.
Yeah.
And also I worked with children, so they were 2 to 4 year olds. So they're innocent and they make you laugh. And they didn't know anything,
Yeah,
so I could be normal.
Yeah, I really get that, actually.
And the kids were at school, so I was like, I can't
Just going to
sit
rattle
at
around the
home.
house being anxious.
Yeah. So, and I was like, we weren't meant to have phones, obviously, because we were working with children, but my boss was like, you can leave it in the kitchen on the desk. And she said, I'm here, so if it rings, I can call you. So I was like, right, okay, fine. And it was only like a little village hall we were in. It wasn't a massive setting. So I think I drove up then that night. I can't remember if it was, or the next day, I can't remember. But got up there and he was bleeding and stuff. So
What, internally?
Yeah, they had to ventilate him and sedate him. By the time I got there, he was already sedated and ventilated. And the nurse said to me that, she goes, he's a strong one, isn't he? And I was like,
Was he resisting?
She said, I was trying to give him the gas and air to knock him out. And she goes, he bit through the mask.
No!
She said,
A
in
rabid
protest.
animal.
Yeah. And she said, that's after he'd sung to me. I called him Honey. So he started singing Honey, Honey, Sugar, Sugar to me. I was like, okay. So eventually they'd got him knocked out. And then he had a really sort of up and down night. And then the next day they took him for some scans and stuff. And he'd got a massive internal bleed. So that's obviously where I think the electricity box had fallen on him. But obviously at the time, they didn't realise that. So they told us that he needed an operation. They said, we don't think he's going to survive the operation.
Goodness.
So we were like, right, okay, but we'll try. But it's a massive, severe rip in his stomach. And he could lose half of his stomach if it does work. So we were like, right. So they said, you need to come and say goodbye. His two friends drove up from St Neots to the hospital to see him. And they said, you need to come and say goodbye. And I was like, I'm not coming to say goodbye. I said, if I come and say goodbye, then I'm accepting that he's going.
Yeah.
So I said, I am not coming to say goodbye.
Was
so
he conscious at all?
No.
No.
So I refused point blank to go in there and see him. His two friends went in. His brother and sister-in-law went in to see him. But I was like, nope. And I didn't. And we then sat in a room. It was probably literally 2 meters by 3 meters with no window, just a ticking clock.
Oh.
And we sat just watching this clock for, I think, about 4 hours. And eventually the consultant came in and said he survived. He said he's actually stronger now than he was before.
Oh, wow.
As in his heart rate and everything. He said, we're just getting him settled back on the ward. So if you want to come and see him, you can. And they'd moved him to, I think it was critical care. I can't remember which is the highest, intensive care or critical care, but they'd moved him. So we went to see him and we sat with him we stayed that night and we sat with him. And I mean, they were brilliant because they were just like, you can sit with him. We won't turf you off. But just to make you aware that they said, we're quite a jolly bunch and we won't not be because you're here.
Yeah.
So you could hear them in the background having a right giggle, and you just go, it's great though that they
and you
can
must
be
need to
normal.
if you work in that environment, mustn't
Exactly.
you?
And they provided hot chocolate. They were great. So we sat there, and to make time pass, we played blood pressure bingo. they were trying to get his blood pressure up. So we downloaded the bingo numbers, and we sat between the three of us sitting there doing with Dave's brother and sister-in-law blood pressure bingo.
What? So every time it hit a number,
we would say the bingo number.
Ingenious use of time, I would say now.
You do, yeah, just to get you through. It's like you need to do something rather than sit there in silence. So that's what we did. So I think we sat with him probably most of the night, and then we got sent out while they do like shift changeovers and stuff. So we went and sat in the relatives' room again, and I know it was this horrible room with these plastic sort of sofas that we were sleeping on. I mean, they were great. They brought in put-me-up beds and stuff because there was only 2 sofas and things. So they were great. So we stayed. I think Dave's brother and sister-in-law went home, and I think I stayed up for the next night, if I remember rightly. And then the nurse the next day... Well, no, because Mark was still with me, so maybe Suzanne just went home. But the next day on the Friday, the nurse said the receptionist had come in, and she said... I've put some food in the relatives' room for you. She said, you must be sick of Subway and hospital food. So she'd gone on her way into work. She'd stopped and bought bread, ham, cheese, apple juice, orange juice,
Oh
and
my
fruit.
goodness.
She'd laid out this whole little spread for us.
And out of her own
Bless her.
pocket?
Yeah.
What a kind thing to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We gave her a cape as well. I can't remember what it was because we were
Deserved
like,
a cape.
yeah, not all heroes wear capes,
Yeah.
but you know, you are
deserve
our hero,
one,
bless
yeah.
her. Yeah. So she did that, and then one of the other nurses said to me, "Have you got change of clothes with you and stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've got a bag in the car." And she said, "Please come with me to the staff room and have a shower."
Well, did you smell
So-
that bad, Nat?
No, I didn't think that. I was just like, okay, well, I have been here 2 days. I've not washed, but okay. But yeah, so she was like, just please come and have a shower. So I was
Oh, I
like,
bet you
okay,
felt
so
that was the best shower
Oh.
you'd ever had.
I thought, I hope no one's listening because I was literally like, oh my God, in the shower. They're going to wonder what I'm doing in here. But it was just that release of water
Yeah,
on you.
it's just lovely.
Yeah, so I had a nice shower, and then when I went back, lovely Wendy, the receptionist, had put a hairdryer in the room for me, and coffee and biscuits, and they were amazing. I cannot fault them.
Do you
They
know
were
what?
amazing.
You hear so much negativity,
Yeah.
and often there is, but it's the small acts of kindness from strangers that really, really make you feel less alone.
I mean, I would leave the hospital to go home, and they would say, "Please ring us when you get home."
To make
And it
sure you're
wasn't. They
okay.
couldn't tell Dave. Dave was out of it, so it wasn't.
They were worried about you.
Yeah, they weren't getting me to ring so they could say, "Oh, Natalie's home safely." They were doing it because they wanted to know
Yeah.
that I was home safely.
How lovely.
Yeah, and so they were brilliant. So, but this went on for 5 weeks. We had of a roller coaster,
And
'cause
just
it was
up and
like
down that motorway.
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
How are the
and-
kids during all of this?
Okay. I say okay. Were they okay?
As okay as they
seemed
could be.
Okay. They had my mum with them. My mum came to the hospital with me once, and my sister, so we dropped them at Dave's brother and sister-in-law's in Northampton, and they had them for the day while we went to the hospital. I don't speak to my sister, haven't spoken to my sister for 5 years, I think, 4 or 5 years.
Right.
But she thought, this isn't why we don't speak, it's another reason, but she thought I was evil because I didn't take the children to the hospital to see Dave.
And was that a decision that you made yourself, or was it a
Yeah.
decision they made? That it was your choice?
It's a decision I made.
And was that because you didn't want them to see him like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I possibly by this time had thought, I don't actually know if he can do this.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that to be their
The
last
last
memory.
bit, yeah.
I wanted the last memory to be him showering them, putting them to bed.
Yeah.
And
Calling them
them
smelly and...
having, a normal giggly night with their
Yeah.
dad. I didn't want them.
Oh, that's made me go cold, that has actually.
yeah.
I don't know why. I think it's...
And I mean, it wasn't a decision I made lightly. I spoke to the nurses. I spoke to, lots of people. And the nurses, they were, again, brilliant because he was right at the very end of the ward. So it would mean walking down one
past all
corridor,
those sick
turning and walking
people.
down another corridor. And it was critical care.
Yeah.
So it
It's
wasn't
not a place
nice
for a
place
child,
to be.
is it?
No, and I mean, they said we can draw the curtains, we can make it as nice, we can talk to them first. So, they weren't saying do it, they were just saying if you
Yeah.
choose to do it, this is what we can do. But I made the decision not to, and my sister was like, you're out of order, blah, 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 the kids won't forgive you for this, and, it's their dad. And she came up on the Saturday to see him, and she walked in, and she turned around and walked out.
Right. Yeah.
And she said to me, she said, I'm so glad you haven't brought the kids.
Yeah.
And I said, no, but you couldn't just accept what
Yeah.
I had
And
said.
no mother is going to make a decision that's
No.
detrimental to their children.
No.
Then we're all trying to do our best, whether it's the
Yeah.
right decision or not. We're trying to do our
Yeah.
best, right?
And I said, I've got pictures. The kids have never asked to see them, but I have
Yeah.
got pictures if they ever want to. And I can say to them, this is why I didn't want you to see him. He was covered in tubes. He had him almost blown up a bit as well. Because he wasn't moving, and I think he'd got lots of fluid everywhere
Yeah.
and stuff. So it wasn't a nice.
It doesn't look like
wasn't
their
a
dad.
nice sight, no. And we struggled going up to see him, so that alone, children going to see him.
And I imagine that even though life wasn't normal for them, being able to have as much normality as possible, going
Yeah.
to school, being in their own home, these things are important for kids.
Yeah, it was. So I'd just spend as much time as I possibly could at the hospital. I'd literally drop the kids off school, drive up, sometimes even just sit there for an hour, drive home, pick the kids up from school.
Thinking about your fuel costs, mate.
I know, just because I wanted to be around for the children. I wanted
Yeah.
them to have as much normality as I could. And I couldn't do anything at the hospital. I needed to see him, but I couldn't do anything.
Yeah. So you're really having to split yourself in two, aren't you?
Yeah. I sat there one day with him, and his brother rang and said, we've all been called to the hospice. They've said that they think Dad's going to die soon. So I was like, I'll come now because I need to see him.
Yeah. Were you close to him?
Yeah, and also the kids, we were all really close, but also I was like, you know, I need to say to Dave as well.
Yeah, you're sort of like his surrogate almost, aren't you?
Yeah.
You go in his place.
So I left the hospital and drove to Northampton and went and sat with them all for a little bit, but he didn't die.
Inconvenient of him.
Yeah, I was like, thanks. But again, the hospice were lovely because they were like, please, will you have a sleep here before you drive home and stuff? And I was like, honestly, I'm fine.
Powered on caffeine and sugar, I would have been at this point.
Yeah, I think that's what I used to buy. There was a fruit stall outside the hospital. Literally, out as you walked out of the hospital, there was this gorgeous fruit stall. And I always used to buy a punnet of cherries. And I used to eat them on the way home because I had to spit the pips out.
Yeah.
So it kept me
awake. You awake, yeah. And also
because
something healthy to eat.
Yeah, and I was having to think about these, that I couldn't just go, I had to spit the pip out. But yeah, I stopped at services to get like 20 minutes sleep and then would carry on. And
quick can of Red Bull and a packet of jelly babies and off you go.
Yeah, I was like, I just need 20 minutes. So I was doing that. Yeah, we then got a phone call one day to say I wasn't going up. It was a Friday. I decided not to go up because they were putting a tracheostomy in, because I think this was like 3 weeks or so that he'd been sedated, and they were like, we need to put a trachea in. So I was like, right, okay. So I decided not to go up. So I went and had lunch with my friend, and I can remember laying on the sofa. I was waiting for the kids to come in from school, and I was laying on the sofa, and my phone went, and it was the hospital saying he's had a cardiac arrest on the table while we were putting the trachea in. You need to come up. So I was like, okay. So rang my mum again, and she came up, and I got in the car and rang Dave's brother, and he was like, I'll come. I was like, I don't know if I can drive. So I drove to Northampton, and Dave's sister-in-law Suzanne drove me and Mark there. Mark was in a hell of a state. He'd been throwing up, bless his heart, and stuff. And again, the hospital were brilliant. They rang every half an hour to 40 minutes to give us an update. And they were like, he's back on the ward, he's stable, you know, blah, blah, blah. But the last time they rang, I was like, I can't answer this.
No. And just driving up there, not knowing what you're going to be faced with.
And Mark goes, they're not going to ring you with bad news. They're not going to ring you if anything's happened. And I was like, yeah, but then if they don't ring now,
you'll think it's bad news, right?
Yeah. So, and it was Friday rush hour traffic, so it took us ages to get there. There was an accident on the motorway, and it was just like, you know, you go, we just need to get there.
Yeah.
So we eventually got there, and he was back on critical care by then. So we sat with him, and he'd got a lovely nurse called Ray looking after him that day. So she was talking us through it, and she said, we went to put the trachea in, and he had cardiac arrest. She said, so we had to manually bag him to try and get him back. And her husband was waiting to go into the police force, and so he was working as a porter at the hospital. And she said, I did get a funny text message from my husband. So I said, why? She goes, well, we're bringing him back to the ward. She said, and I had to straddle Dave, she said, to manually bag him to get him back. She said,
no way to go to get a woman to straddle Dave.
Exactly. And she said, my husband messaged me going, what are you doing?
And he'd seen her, had he?
They'd gone past him. And I was like, so we were laughing. I said, the only thing that Dave's going to be gutted about is he not
slept through it.
That. Yeah, while you were straddling him. Yeah, so he was alive. So,
but still not conscious.
No. So we stayed with him that night. We then came home the next day, and I then I think I'd been home a few hours, got a phone call to say he'd got pneumonia.
Oh my goodness.
So they were like, you need to come back. I was like, okay.
Do you know what? I can feel the weariness of it, like the phone call, and you know you need to go, you want to go, but just the prospect of sitting in that bloody car again. Yeah.
And, you know, it was just draining, and you did feel like you were doing 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That was the hard bit about it.
At any point did they talk about moving him to a closer hospital? Was he just not well enough?
He was never well enough to move. They still hadn't operated on his arm at this stage either, because he obviously wasn't conscious, and they couldn't risk doing any operations that weren't necessary.
Absolutely vital, yeah.
So we spent some more time at the hospital with him with his pneumonia. I think my friend flew in from Spain to come and see him with me. My mum came up with me. We sat with him one day. My mum was there and they'd propped him up a little bit. And we were just sitting there chattering away with him and like talking to him because he was still out of it and talking to the nurse and stuff. And you get used to all the bleeps going off and you go, oh, that's fine. That's nothing to worry about. Because my mum's like, how do you sit there calmly? And I said, because you know what the bleeps are.
Yeah.
I said, you get used to all the sounds and you go, oh, no, that's nothing to worry about. So, yeah, we sat there and there was this bleep going off and the nurse was sort of like looking around the other beds and stuff. And she suddenly went, oh, it's me. And we looked and she'd managed to unplug his air mattress. And he was just disappearing. So this like air mattress was just coming round him and we were just like, oh my God. So me and my mum were absolutely wetting ourselves because she plugged him back in and he just like went... And it was just like, oh. So we did have lots of giggles, mostly at his expense, but he never knew that. So while we were there were lots of giggles going on. Like they always brought us biscuits, coffee and biscuits and stuff. And so we'd always be like that.
And you know what? If he could hear you, then how nice for him to hear the sound of your laughter.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I think it was that day that Dave's brother rang to say his dad had died.
Oh.
So we were like, right, okay. So I said, I'll leave now and I'll come and see him. Because I was like, I wanted to say to Dave, I went and said goodbye for you and stuff. So we drove from Stoke to Northampton and I went to the hospice to see him and said goodbyes and stuff. And my friend had picked the children up from school that day. And then I was like, oh, I've now got to tell them that their granddad's died and their dad's still not right. So I went home and broke the news to them about that. And I can't say they were fine about it, but I think...
Do you think because they'd known it was happening and, you know, and I guess it's the right order of things, isn't it? Grandparents are usually the first person that a child loses.
Yeah, so I think, you know, they took it all in their stride. So, yeah, we did that. And then, so that was the 19th, I think, of July. And then, again, I just carried on backwards and forwards to the hospital. So I went up to see him on the Saturday, which was the 22nd, with his friend. His friend took me up there. And he was having a okay day. They'd taken the ventilation off a little bit. So he wasn't on as much oxygen and they had taken a bit of to stop him being so out of it. Mm-hmm. So he did sort of smile and he was trying to say the odd words to us and stuff. So I was a bit like, this is good. This is, you know, we're turning a corner here. So we had a really lovely day with him and he was sort of nodding and stuff and he'd then fall asleep in bits. But it was more, you saw his eyes and you hadn't seen his eyes for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So we left on a really sort of positive that day. It was his mum's birthday the next day and my mum's birthday as well. They shared birthdays. So I'd taken her presents and stuff up to Stoke because they were going up to spend the day with him. So his brother and sister-in-law and his mum. So I thought it'd be really nice, you know, if he's awake, she can open her presents and stuff with him and I can spend the day with my mum. Mm-hmm. So that was the plan. And then I got a phone call in the morning. I'd slept solidly that night. It was the first night I'd slept solidly. And I got a phone call, I think it was about 8 a.m, to say he really wasn't very good. His lungs were all filling up with fluid. He had gone septic and they were trying to drain his lungs off, but every time they tried to move his bed, his blood pressure was dropping. And so it was a bit of a catch-22, you know, what do we do?
What's most urgent?
Do we move his bed and risk his blood pressure or what do we do? So they said, you need to come up.
I bet you don't want to hear those words ever again.
No.
You need to come up.
So literally ran out, got there. He really, really wasn't very good. And he was back on 100% oxygen and they'd sedated him again completely and stuff. So we spent the night up there. And then the next day, Maisie rang me and she was in a bit of a state. I think my sister was doing her nutting and she was in a bit of a state and she was like, I just miss you. And I was, you know, you just go, oh my God, what do I do? It's the first time she'd had a sort of
Real
mini
wobble.
breakdown, if anything. Wobble. And I was like, what do I do? So I spoke to the nurse and I was like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, the kids are really suffering now. And I said, but I don't want to leave him. I said, what happens if I leave him and he dies? And she said, has anybody said to you he's going to die? And I was like, well, no. And she goes, and if it does happen, you could pop to the toilet and it could happen. So you can't, he's not going to not do anything because you're here.
Yeah.
So I was like, right, okay. So she said, if Dave was awake, what would he tell you to do? And I said, do you tell me to go to the kids? And she said, then that's what you need to do. So I was like,
Wise woman, hey?
yeah. So I came back and spent some time with the kids and just kept in contact with the hospital all the time. And then the next day I checked in with them and I felt really sick and I was really dizzy. Every time I sort of bent over, my head was just, I was a bit like, whoa. And I said to them, I cannot drive up today. I said, I need to make that decision. That I just
you
can't
wouldn't be
do
safe,
it.
would you, if you were feeling that way?
And that's the thing. And I just thought the last thing the kids need is for me to have an accident and be in hospital. So I was like, I cannot do it. And they said, that's absolutely fine. We'll keep you posted. There's no change at the moment. So we'll just keep you posted. So I was like, right, okay. So we went to Tesco's to get some bits for lunch and bumped into my mum. So we went in the cafe and had a coffee. And we were sort of sitting there chatting. And it was Maisie's birthday in the following month. So this was the 24th of July. And it was Maisie's birthday in August. And she said to me, do you promise me you'll take me to the hospital to see Dad for my birthday? And I said to her, I can't make that promise.
Big ask, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I said, I can't make that promise, Maisie. I said, I'd never said to them he was going to be okay. I'd never promised them anything. I'd always said, if, buts, and maybes.
And that's really hard, isn't it? Because all they want from you is a guarantee.
Yeah.
And all you want to be able to do is say, Daddy's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. But you can't.
No, because I thought if I give them that guarantee, how are they going to feel about me if I then turn around and go, well, he didn't make it? So I said, I can't promise you that, Maisie. I said, we just need to see what happens. So I said, but we'll see what happens. And I'd always planned that when he was sitting in a chair, even if he still had his trachea in, but if he was sitting in a chair and could put his arm out, I would take them up.
Yeah, because it's less scary.
Yeah. But I was like, until he's at that stage, I am not taking them. And it'd been 5 weeks by this point since they'd seen him, since the accident. So we had coffee and stuff with my mum, and then we went to my friends for lunch. And the kids were all playing, and they'd spent a lot of time together. So it was that bit of normality. So the kids were playing, and my phone went, and it was the hospital. And he said, "Are you on your own?" And I was like, "No, I'm at my friend's." And he's like, "Right, okay." He said, "He isn't going to make it."
Oh.
He said he's on 100% oxygen. He said 98% of his lungs are filled with fluid. He said we cannot get the fluid down. He said, we've done a scan and it is just solid on there. He said he is completely septic. He was already on sort of like a dialysis machine because the organs had started to fail and stuff. He said, he isn't going to make it. He said, you need to come up. So I was like, right, okay. So I can remember standing in, my friend had converted her garage and she'd got like a garden room in there and a kids' play room, and the kids were in the house, so I can remember standing there. So I rang my mum, good old mum, and said to her,
bless mummy.
Yeah, and said to her, I need to go out. I said, I need you to have the kids. I said, but you can't say anything to them. I said, I don't want them to know. So she was like, right, okay. And obviously she was in tears. Dave and her, well, she thought the absolute world of him, and he did her. He would pop in on his way home from work for coffee sometimes just to see her and stuff. They had a really, really lovely relationship. Yeah, I wouldn't be there. He'd come.
That's
I'd
really
ring him sometimes.
sweet.
Yeah. And my mum was on her own. Her and my dad split up when I was 3, so she'd never remarried. So she was on her own.
Oh, I bet she got him doing some man jobs, did she?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes, yes. But he'd always just pop in and have a coffee with her. So it was really, really lovely. So she was obviously distraught, and I was like, I feel awful leaving you with the kids, knowing what's happening. But I was like, you cannot say anything. And she was like, no, I won't. So I rang his best friend Gavin and said to him, I've just been called up to the war. I'm being called up to the hospital. And he was like, can I come with you? And I was like, yeah. So I picked him up from work. I rang Mark, and drove to Northampton and picked him up. And then we carried on to the hospital. And we parked the car and we walked in. And I can remember walking down the corridor. I'd got Mark's hand one side and I'd got Gav's hand the other side. And it was almost like that last walk.
Yeah.
Because we were like, this is it.
Yeah, I get that. That really, that walking down and nothing's ever going to be the same again once you get to where you're going.
Yeah. So we got to the reception and I was like, yes, if he's even still alive. I was like, he might not be alive now. So they took us to the relatives room and the consultant said to us, there is absolutely nothing we can do. His organs are all failing and he isn't going to survive. The kindest thing to do is to switch the machines off and just let him die. So we were like, right, okay. She said, you can be with him. You can do it in your own time, but we suggest you don't leave it too long.
Yeah.
So we walked down to his bed and I pulled the curtain open. And the first thing I noticed was they'd taken all the dressings, all the bandage and everything off his arm. Because they'd never operated on it, so it was all just still bandaged up. But they'd taken all that off. And I was like, there's a reason they've taken all that off, because they've done it.
They're not going to operate.
Yeah. And they know that to strip him down and to have him looking as normal as possible. So, yeah, we stayed with him for a bit. And I went to the toilet. Gav used to laugh at me because literally I'd have nervous wheeze.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
So when they operated on him, the toilet was literally just outside the room that we all sat in. And I must have gone to the toilet, there's no exaggeration, probably 40 or 50 times in those 4 hours. And Gavin was like, you've not drunk anything, you can't need a wee.
How was
again.
anything coming out now?
Yeah. But it was just that whole, oh God, I need a wee.
Yeah.
So I was like, I need a wee. And Gav's like, there's a surprise. So I went to the toilet and the toilet was quite a walk from where he was. And I can remember sitting on the toilet having a wee. And Gav banged on the door and he's like, Nat, you need to come quickly. So I was like, right, okay. And they said, they think he's going to go. So we rushed back down there and he hadn't. We said to them, yeah, if you want to do it, then just do it. And they said, I can't remember what nurse was with him then. I know it was a man, but I can't remember who it was. He said to me, Michelle wants to know if it's okay if she comes in. And I was like, it's her day off because she was with him last night. I spoke to her and he goes, yeah, but we've got a WhatsApp group. He said, and we've put on there that Dave isn't going to survive and he's going to die soon. And she's like, please, can you ask if I could come in and say goodbye to me? And I was like, absolutely, yeah. So she came in to say goodbye. And we stayed with him while they switched the machines off and he did go really, really quickly.
Did you hold his hand?
Really quickly, yeah. Oh, I think I was literally laying on top of him, to be fair. I'd got my face next to his face and I was literally laying on top and Gav and his brother had a hand each, but I was literally almost on top of him. So, yeah, they switched the machines off and he went really, really quickly.
He was ready.
Yeah. So we left him and went to the relatives' room and, again, they'd put coffee in there and Dave's brother said, you can tell it's serious. We got cake today and not biscuits.
At least it wasn't gin, I suppose.
Yeah, well, God, I could have done with one of those. Yeah, so we sat and made various phone calls that we needed to make. And then we went in to see him again and I couldn't do it. They'd taken all his tubes off and he just looked grey.
Yeah.
And I think I'd got so used to him wired up.
Yeah.
It just didn't look like him. So I literally was like, I can't do this. And I walked out and Michelle stayed with me. She did not leave our side until we left the hospital that night.
This woman needs some sort of
reward. I know. So, yeah, so she stayed with us until we were ready to go. But nothing was rushed. It was...
Sounds like they took really good care of you as well as him.
Oh, they were absolutely amazing. I cannot fault them. I don't think you appreciate the NHS until you need them.
But also there must be an element of, you kind of reap what you sow and, you must have been kind to them and he had fun with them and, you built a rapport and the way they were with you guys, I'm sure they try and do that for everyone, but they can't.
She did say to me, she said, some people you just make a bond with.
Yeah.
And she said some families, she said, come and go. They still get the same care, but they come and go and they don't. She said, but, you know, we got to know you. We sat with you for 5 weeks, not just Dave.
Yeah.
She said, and to be fair, he was out of it for 4 weeks, so we'd sit and talk to you about things. So, you know, we grew close to you as well.
And now you've now got to, your husband has died, sorry, your partner has now died, and you've got to drive down that bloody motorway for the last time.
Yeah.
And you've got to do the hardest thing that a mother can ever do. Yeah. You've got to tell those babies. And 6 days
after I've told them that their granddad's died, I've now got to tell them.
That was your warm-up, kids. Here we go.
Yeah, but that's what it was like. It was like a practice run for everything. So, so we set off the journey home. And Dave's mum was at Dave's brother's house. So she was with Suzanne in Northampton. So I was obviously had to drop Mark off. So we stopped and saw her for a bit. And I think we're just numb, you know, you just...
And this woman's lost her husband and her child in the space of 6 days. He was the youngest.
Dave was the youngest. Her baby. So, we spent some time with them. And you're numb and you're in a daze. You're just like, this doesn't seem real.
It's like you're watching yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, and the hardest thing I think I felt was walking away from Stoke and leaving him there.
Yeah, because you knew you weren't going to go back.
126 miles away from home. And, it's like, it was, I don't know whether if he'd been at a local hospital it would have been less daunting.
Possibly, because it's just that huge expanse of distance, isn't it?
Yeah. So we spent some time with Dave's mum and dad, Dave's mum and brother and stuff, and then drove home and dropped Gavin off. And Dave's friend had said to Gav, if Nat needs a lift, I'll come and get her from Stoke and whatever. And Gav's like, no, she's fine. And then he tried to ring him to say, would he come and pick me up from his house, from Gavin's house, which was like 30 minutes away from mine. So I wasn't on my own driving, and he couldn't get hold of him. So he's never forgiven himself that he'd fallen asleep and not answered the phone. And I was like, it's fine. I got home. It's fine. You don't need to worry.
And had you told your mum that he'd died at this point?
Yes.
So she knows, but
the kids still remember, because when I told my mum, she was pretending to hang some washing out.
Right.
At mine. And the kids said to her, Nanny, are you crying? And she goes, no, it's just my hay fever. And they remember that.
Yeah. So she's trying to keep her shit together so that, because presumably you not necessarily want to be the one to tell them, but you need to be the one to tell them.
I needed to be the one to tell them. And obviously by the time we left the hospital and stuff, it was quite late in the evening. So I said to my mum, please just put them to bed as normal.
Let them have one more normal night.
If you keep them up, they're going to know that something is wrong.
And it's delaying that inevitable, isn't it? Let them have that one night where their dad's still alive in their minds.
They were always in bed for like 7:30ish, so I was like, please just put them to bed and I will face it in the morning. So I think I got home early hours, like 2 in the morning or something, and my mum went home. She did say, do you want me to stay? And I was like, no. I was like, I'm fine. So she went home, and I can remember just sitting on the bed, sat there
waiting.
Thinking, shit.
Yeah.
Shit. And one of Dave's friends lived in Canada, so I can remember him ringing, and he was sobbing down the phone and stuff. And so I just sat, and I heard Charlie's bedroom door open in the morning, and he came in my room, and he said, oh, you're back? And I said, yeah. And he goes, how's Dad? And I thought, I can't answer this question, and I can't tell him
without his sister
telling Maisie. So I was like, let's go and see if Maisie's awake, shall we? And I texted my mum and said they're awake, because she was going to come up just in case.
Yeah.
I didn't want her there while I told them, but
you
just
need a bit
in case
of backup,
I needed
don't you?
her. Yeah. So we went into Maisie's room, and she woke up as I opened the door. And I think her first words as well were, how's Dad? So I just sat down on bed, and Charlie sat on the bed, and I just said, I'm really, really sorry, kids, but he didn't make it. He died last night. So we all had a cuddle and a cry, and I can't even remember what other words were said.
But it's being that person that shatters their world, isn't it? It's that, I don't know, and I know it was not deserved. But I had this almost sense of shame around it, that I had destroyed their childhood because it was me that was having to tell them this awful thing.
Yeah, and that is how you feel. Yeah. It's like I'm breaking their hearts.
Yeah. Not deliberately, but it's you feel like it's your job as mum to protect them.
Yeah. And then my mum walked up the stairs with my sister, and I think one of them asked if they knew. I'm sure I can remember one of them saying to my mum, "Did you know?" And then my sister said something to them about going to McDonald's for breakfast, and they were like, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah, because that's what kids do, right?
She's like, "Well, stay in your pyjamas because we'll just go through the drive-through and stuff." So they went off to McDonald's.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Because if someone told me that news, like, hell could I eat? But children, it's that compartmentalisation of it, the way they put their grief into like a little pocket and come back to it and at different times.
Yeah. And obviously the summer holidays had just begun as well, so there was no school.
Yeah. Do you think that was helpful because they could kind of grieve in private a bit?
Yeah, I think it was, to be fair, and because there was I had them with me.
Yes.
There was I didn't have to make the decision to keep them off school. I didn't have to push them to go into school and stuff. So, yeah, I think it did help. And then Dave's brother and sister-in-law and mum and everybody just kept popping in that day. So we sort of had a day of people popping in and out. And then the Thursday, I had to leave them I didn't have to, but they'd said about helping plan Dave's dad's funeral, which I was honoured to still be involved. So I went to Northampton to help plan Dave's dad's funeral. So we did that. And then, it was just... I can remember saying to the kids, and I remember you saying this about your children once, said it... They said about people coming around all the time. They were like, please, can we just have a night on our own?
It starts to feel like a circus.
Yeah. And again, everyone's bringing food, which is amazing. You know, people just knocking on the door. Even one of the ladies that used to look after the kids at nursery, and they only went for... Maisie went when I was really heavily pregnant with Charlie, and then they went, I think, for a few weeks while I helped my old workplace out. So they didn't go, it wasn't like they went regularly for years.
But they remembered them and wanted to do something.
And they one of the girls sent me a message, and she said, please, can I have your address? She said, I want to drop some stuff off. And she dropped off lasagnas, chilies, all this food.
Proper food that you can freeze, and real home-cooked hearty food, which is what you need.
The freezer for us, and I was just like... Yeah, and I think it was just a blur, the rest of it, and the house was full of flowers, and...
Now, you guys weren't married, were you? Did that add extra complications for you? Because
yes,
8 years ago, well, it'll be nearly 9 years this year, won't it?
Yeah.
The law was different around even things like bereavement support payments and things like
didn't
this.
Get anything.
So how did this make things more complicated for you?
Thankfully... I didn't even know if I was on the deeds. I knew I was on the mortgage, but I didn't know if I was on the deeds of the house. And because we weren't married, I wasn't officially next of kin, because you're not. So his mum...
Crazy, isn't it?
I know. I was like, we're married, we've got children. His mum was officially next of kin, even though all his paperwork said me.
Yeah.
It wasn't legal. His mum was officially next of kin. Thankfully, we had a brilliant relationship, because she could have turned around and gone out.
Yeah, it's terrifying, isn't it?
And when I went to the solicitors, she said to me, her first words were, are you on the deeds? And I said, I don't know.
No.
And I said, because originally I said, Dave bought the house and the mortgage was just in his name. I said, and then we got a joint mortgage. I said, but I don't know if I was ever put on the deeds. And she goes, right, we'll find out. She said, because if you're not, she said, it automatically will go to his mum or the children. She said, and you will never be able to sell the house or do anything. And the children can turn around and kick you out when they're 18.
Ungrateful little shits.
Yeah. I was like, oh, well, I just won't look after them now then. Thankfully, I was. So that was
But that's a real lesson for people who perhaps are not married and own a house together. I wouldn't think to check this.
No, even if you are not on even if you're on the mortgage, doesn't mean you are on the deeds. So check. So yeah, there was that. I wasn't entitled to any benefits. We didn't even get child support, like the £134 a month, whatever it was, because Dave earned too much, so I could start claiming for that. And then obviously I couldn't go out to work, so I did manage to get universal credits and stuff, but I couldn't get any of the bereavement payments.
But this is also as well, when you've been independent and you've worked, you then have to find yourself navigating a benefit system, which is how anybody fiddles benefits, I don't know, because trying to claim them legitimately is hard enough. And what about work? What about his work? What happened? Was there ever a reason for the accident?
His work were really good. During when he was poorly, she would ring regularly and I would keep in contact with her. They came out, I remember rightly, 2 days after he died. They came to the house. They said, please book the funeral, do whatever you want to do, we will pay for it, blah 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 blah. You don't need to run anything by us, just do what you
I'd have had a marching band, some unicorns.
So that was a saving, because I was like, I've not got the money.
I know. And funerals are so expensive.
And also you want to give them the best send-off that you possibly can. Yeah.
You don't want to be cheap about it, but you haven't got the money.
Yeah, no. So, they were like, just please do what you need to do. So we were like, okay. And I was always very much, they didn't set out to kill him. Yeah. It was a horrific accident. They didn't go to work that day and go, we're going to kill 3 people today. It was, the other families didn't feel like that. I felt like that. So they were really, really good. They carried on paying him for the first year.
Wow.
I know, yeah. So I didn't have money worries, really.
Yeah.
I could still pay my bills.
Yeah.
I could still feed the children. I could still...
It gave you that breathing space.
We needed to do. And people were great. My friend had set up a Just Givings page and people were really generous and stuff.
Because that's something tangible people can do. And particularly if people aren't able to come and cook you meals or help you with the kids.
Yeah.
I think, but you always feel like you can't do it yourself. My brother set one up for my kids to buy them a Nintendo Switch. They'd just come out. And he set up this Just Giving page and people were so generous. Like they were so kind and so generous. And they bought the Nintendo Switch and there was money left over, which helped me survive. And I always try and give in to one if I see one now. Because
I do.
I think even if you put a £5 in, it makes a difference. I couldn't have survived
without that. No. Because then the fun started happening that our mortgage had come to an end of term.
Oh shit, so you've got to try and apply for a mortgage with no job and no husband.
No. And Dave was... nothing's ever going to happen to me. So didn't have life insurance, didn't have cover on the mortgage. So I was still paying the mortgage, but because it had come to an end of a term, I looked like I was defaulting every month.
Oh no.
So even when I tried to
you're going to lose your home now.
So even when I tried to get a phone contract, I couldn't, because I was completely blacklisted. All my credit score was really low and stuff because of it.
People don't think about this stuff.
No. And the mortgage company were ringing me every single week saying, you need to pay off. And I'm not talking like...
we need to pay off the whole mortgage?
Yeah. Or do a new mortgage. And I was like, you know what has happened. Yeah, but you haven't got a mortgage on the house.
And it's that computer says no, isn't it? It's all the time. Well, but I've told you why.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this for fun.
No. And then they started sending letters saying that... they were going to repossess the house, and he just I don't
need must have been so frightened.
I'd got a solicitor involved because of the accident, so we knew there would be compensation and stuff. We just didn't know how long the compensation would take or how much there would be. So my solicitor did write to them in the end and say, if you carry on, we will go to the papers.
Yeah.
And so they did eventually leave me alone. They would just ring. It started to then go every few months they would ring.
And were you still paying off the mortgage payments?
I was. And then the company rang me the following April after the accident. And I was just going on a rugby tour with Charlie because he played rugby. And we had stopped at the services at Norwich and my phone went. And it was the managing director of the company telling me that they'd been advised by their solicitors not to carry on paying me.
Whoa. And is that perhaps because it might have been shown that they were taking blame, an admission of guilt?
Yeah. So I was like, okay, brilliant.
Thanks.
For that. So I had to stop paying the mortgage because I had no money.
If you haven't got it, you can't, right?
I was still trying to work. And my wage was, as I say, I worked for a little village preschool.
Yeah, that's not going to pay the bills.
it was always pocket money.
Yeah.
You know, we used it.
I
if
was
we went away
working as
for
a
the
swimming
weekend.
teacher, same. You know, it was
Yeah.
a little bit of, Ben used to call it my pin money, which is a very old-fashioned term.
Yeah, but that's what mine was. It never
Yeah.
went into the house. It never went into running the house. It was always if we went out for the day to get the kids stuff, you know, and
Yeah.
bits like that. So yeah, it was trying to survive. Thankfully, as I say, we'd got this Just Giving page as well, so I could use some of that because the boiler broke like it does.
Of course,
and it was the meltdowns after that came because Dave was really hands-on. He could fix anything.
Yeah, same. Ben was.
Absolutely anything.
And everything breaks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like the boiler broke.
Yeah.
And the fridge freezer broke.
Someone nicked
and
the
I think
lights out of my
washing
car.
machine broke.
Like,
yeah.
thanks,
The
guys.
the kitchen lights all went and just stuff like that. And, you know, you just go, I can't do this. I can't.
And it does. And it's you think it'd be the grief, the loss, the death that had you on. And yeah, of course, there is an element of that. But I found it was all these incremental things afterwards that would have me in despair because it would just take me straight to that point of I can't do this without you.
Yeah. Because and that's what it is. You know, the one person that you need to fix it
Not
isn't
there.
there. And yeah, he literally would just fix everything. He never bought anything new. He could just fix it. He was just, his brother's exactly the same. His dad was exactly the same. It's just how they rolled.
Yeah.
And everything just seemed to go wrong after that. And I was just like, I've got no money. I've got no, you know, this is,
Really
I'm trying to sort the
helpless.
kids out. It was a real shit time because not only are you grieving, you're also trying to carry on.
Yeah. And you feel
can't
so
just sit in a
mercenary
room.
worrying about money at a time like this. All I wanted to do was grieve my husband. I didn't want to be thinking about how was I going to pay the bills and the mortgage and, you know, the car payments. But life, it keeps going on around you.
Yeah.
And you had a delay getting a death certificate as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so we only ever had a temporary death certificate, and that was, the hospital rang me and said we needed to do the death certificate. Obviously, we know or temporary one, we know the distance, so you can't come and identify him for us to raise it. And they didn't do it, obviously, when we were there, so they said, can you send us a picture, a head and shoulders picture of him? So he said, and then I can identify him. So I was like, trying to find a sensible picture was...
Without a cape on.
Yeah, or stupid hats or whatever. So it was just... Or we used to spray his beard. He grew a beard, so we used to spray it white at Christmas and stuff. So we just... Yeah. So I had to send that. So yeah, they did a temporary certificate. And the amount of people that we rang and they were like, we can't do anything without
can't
a proper
accept
certificate.
that, yeah.
Well, I'm not going to get a proper certificate yet. And well, we need to talk to him. Yeah, good luck. What part are you not listening
Talk to him.
Yeah,
Jesus
he is dead.
Christ.
I used to turn around and go, if you do get to talk to him, can you give him a message for me?
Yeah. Also, you know, polish up your crystal ball, please do.
Yeah. People are just so insensitive about things and just don't get it.
And was there an investigation? There must have been an investigation into what happened, and these things take a long time, don't they?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but we only had the inquest in November last year.
So 8 years
8.5 years later.
to find out what happened.
Yeah.
And was that the first time that you'd found out what had happened on that day?
I knew bits because we were involved with the police and the CPS, so we knew bits that had happened. Obviously, loads of Dave's friends were also in that job, so they knew Chinese whispers and things that were going on. So, yeah, we knew. So basically, when you put the crane up, you have a method statement. So the instructions, because the manual is like 700 pages long. So they write a method statement, and the method statement was wrong.
Shit.
So what they should have done was they should have put the tower up, and then they should have put the cab on and the back jib, and they should have put a partial ballast weight on. Then they should have put the front jib on, and then they should have put the rest of the weights on. But it was missing the partial ballast.
So it tipped.
So it tipped over.
And was that just a simple case of human error?
It was a case of people not being trained
Right.
to be doing their job, and the fact that the CPS were trying to do the company for corporate manslaughter.
Right.
And they couldn't do it because there were too many mistakes made. So, like, if you have a car crash and you drive along and you hit someone in a car and they unfortunately die, you can be held responsible.
Yeah.
But because there were so many mistakes made along the way of people not checking things, people not doing things properly.
Wow. And did that make you angry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I say, I didn't at the time. I didn't because the company was so good. They paid for the funeral. His funeral was, our funeral's lovely, but his funeral
As lovely
was
as they can be.
lovely. I spoke. Charlie spoke. There was probably 350, 400 people there.
Powerful.
Like people were getting out of vans in boiler suits or like overalls, and then getting in the back and coming out in suits. And because my friend said that to me because she was there. And the old company he used to work for near home, they turned the jib of their crane to point at the crematorium on the day of the funeral and posted it on Facebook and put for our fallen Conrad and because my friend,
It's got me in the feels, that has.
My friend's husband sent me that when we were coming back from the funeral and we were in the funeral car.
Do you know what? There's nothing's bringing them back, nothing's getting rid of the pain, but to know that they are highly thought of, to know that people care. And there's something about the funeral where everybody's grieving, everybody's feeling a little bit of what you're feeling. And I think that's why it is important to have a lot of people there. Often people think, oh, there'll be so many people there, they won't notice if I'm there or not. Doesn't matter. Just go.
No. Yeah, go. Because, I will never, ever forget the amount of people there. I mean, walking down, following the coffin with kids was just...
You did that. You brave bugger.
Yeah, so we walked down after him. I think I had Charlie and my mum had Maisie, and like holding hands and walked down.
Brave babies.
And did that. And yeah, as I say, I spoke, Charlie spoke, Maisie wrote something but couldn't speak.
That's so interesting because I spoke and Monty spoke and Hector drew a picture because he didn't feel he could speak. And I'm so glad that they had kind of contributed in whatever way they could. And I held tabs in my arms, trying to wriggle and get down probably.
And they need to be part of it.
I think so. And it's a bit like whether to take them and see them in hospital. It's a very personal decision, isn't it? For me, and possibly for you as well, because they hadn't got to say bye to their dad. I think there's something very important about giving them the opportunity, whether they would want to or not. I gave them the choice of being there because they needed that formal goodbye.
And they'd had a practice run as well because they'd had their granddads a couple of weeks
before.
Poor
granddad, a practice run.
Well, that's what it was. It literally was a practice run. And I'm grateful that they did.
Yeah. Well,
because
I guess it was a kind of act of, if you look at it like it was their granddad doing a kindness to them, to help path.
I can't imagine how they would have been just turning up to their dad's funeral if they hadn't experienced another funeral. It was at completely different places. So Dave's was in Bedford, Dave's dad's was in Northampton. So completely different places. And you just try and prepare them, don't you, as much as possible. I was like, it's going to be very different and I did take them the day before the funeral. I took them to the crematorium.
Did you?
And just drove round and said, this is where we'll drive in. This is where the hearse will stop and we'll be in the car behind and it will stop there. And then, people will be already in. And then we will get out and they'll obviously take the coffin out. And so I tried to talk them through it and I didn't want them to have the shock of turning up there and not knowing
That's a really kind thing to do.
Look like. We did that. So they knew. My half-sister flew in, who I've only recently been in contact with. She flew in from Scotland and she stayed with us and that was really lovely. So we had her with us and stuff. And I can remember just laughing the morning of the funeral because we were all at our house and the funeral cars turned up and we were like, right, he's here. And so Danielle, my half-sister, came in the funeral cars with us. And so we were in the front one. So we got in the car and Danielle goes, the guy walking in front. And we were like, yeah. And he goes, does he walk all the way to the crematorium? And I was like, no, Danielle. I said, I took you there yesterday. I said, it's like a 20-minute drive. I said, yeah.
He's going to meet us there tomorrow.
I said, the funeral's in a day or so. And she was like, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought that one through, had I? And we were like, no.
But you were still laughing. And I love the fact that laughter runs all the way through your story. It sounds like it was such an integral part of who Dave was and that you've managed to carry that on.
Yeah. The inquest was shocking. We had a court case as well. It got thrown out of court because people had lied and the company obviously know what they're doing.
Jesus Christ.
So it got thrown out of court. So they didn't face any legal charges. So they got found not guilty of, they were being done for health and safety charges. and they got found not guilty. That was really hard, listening to those words, not guilty. I think what gets to me more is, it took so long, so I think people had almost forgotten
the damage,
small things as well, what could have been said. And listening to the inquest went on for 6 days last year.
Were you there?
In Warrington. So, because that was the closest court to where the accident was, because it had to be a Crown court.
And it has to be near the accident. I never even thought of that.
Yeah. So literally I drove up on the Sunday the first week and came home on the Friday, and then drove back the Sunday and came home the Wednesday, which is when it was over. So 6 days we sat and listened to that. And by this time I was angry. Yeah.
And were the families of the other young men that had been killed there?
Yeah. So they'd been at the court case as well. So we'd all got quite close. So I think there was just one day for a pre-inquest hearing that I was on my own, but I didn't feel like I was on my own, because all the families had connected, and we'd all spent a lot of time messaging and chatting on the phone and stuff like that. But I turned to anger then, because I was like, you don't give a shit.
No. And it's that kind of covering of arses going on as well, that you want somebody to take some accountability and say, we made a terrible mistake and we are sorry.
Yeah, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
Nothing is going to change it. He isn't going to come back. Just hold your hands up and go, we fucked up.
And also learn from it. If you acknowledge your liability, then you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, but we had to sit in a room with them at the inquest for 6 days. And every day... she's not managing director now. This is where you go, you know how to play the system. They've all changed roles, and she's now a non-executive director and stuff. And you go, She sat every single day. She sat in that courtroom in the morning, and she'd shake her mints out and then line them all up on her table.
What?
Yeah.
How
and I
bizarre.
thought, I'm going to shove them somewhere in a minute.
Yeah.
And that's what she'd do. And it was like the rattle of a tin.
Oh, but
lining it, and you just go, I am.
And you need somebody to be angry with as well. You do.
Yeah. So, and we found out a lot at the inquest that we didn't know either. So that was hard. It brought back a hell of a lot of memories.
And that enormous amount of time that's gone between, things that you would have not necessarily forgotten, but, laid to rest a little bit, that it all brings it back up again for you.
And in between, obviously, Dave dying and the inquest, my mum passed away.
Oh, that's not your mum.
In fact, it's her 6-year anniversary tomorrow. She had to die on Valentine's Day, didn't she?
So inconsiderate.
Yeah, I know. So it's just like,
she just didn't want you to ever forget the date, you see.
I hate the day.
Oh, how did your mum die?
She messaged me and said she got an upset stomach. And she was like, don't come round, because I really don't feel very well. And I was like, do you need anything? And she goes, some Lucozade would be nice. So this was the Monday she'd got an upset stomach. So the Wednesday, I'd said to her, do you need anything? And she'd like, some Lucozade would be nice. So I dropped some Lucozade off. And she's like, please don't come in, just put it in the porch. I don't want you to come in. I'm really, really not well. So I was like, okay. So that's what I did. And then the Thursday, I messaged her to see how she was feeling and didn't hear back. And I was like, that's really weird. And I spoke to my aunt and said to my aunt, have you heard from Mum? She said, I've spoken to Claire though, and she's spoken to her. So I was like, all right, okay, she's fine then. Anyway, that evening, my sister tried to ring me. And I just dropped Maisie off at a fitness class she did. And I went, ooh. And I was like, ooh, and put my phone down. And then she texted and said, please, can you ring me? Mum's not very well. I've had to call an ambulance. Oh. So I did ring her. And I said, what's happened? So she said, someone turned up at hers. So my sister made these like chocolate bouquets. Yeah. And her and my mum did them. So someone turned up to collect this bouquet, and she'd rung my sister and said, I can't get hold of your mum. She said, I'm knocking on the door, but there's no reply. And Claire was like, well, that's really odd. And she goes, I've been up there today. So Claire went up there, and it was night, so like the curtains were shut as well. So she couldn't see if she was there or not. And Claire went up and she was just sitting in her chair, and there were biscuits all over the floor. She said, like, the heating, it must have been like 30 something degrees in there. My mum never had heating on because she was always cold. And we thought she'd had a stroke because she was like, couldn't talk properly. And so the ambulance, they were trying to get to lift her arms and stuff. And she was really confused with what she was saying. So she was yellow as well. So they were trying to work out which hospital to take her to, one that deals with strokes.
Tell me it was.
Or one, no, or one that deals with her like jaundice that they thought she'd got. So they decided to take her to the more local one. So I went in the ambulance with her. Anyway, she was making a bit more sense and stuff, but then she was just really not. And she had a CT scan, and I was like, oh, I can remember last time she had a CT scan. I said she absolutely flipped, and I had to stand the other end holding her head. So I said, if you need me to do it, I'll do it. And they said, well, we'll see how we get on. So they managed to do it, but they said she was wriggling quite a lot. So they did the CT scan, and they came back and said they couldn't see anything. There wasn't like any brain injury or anything, so they didn't think she'd had a stroke. Anyway, they admitted her. We came home. The next day, I half expected to get there and her be sitting in bed eating toast and just being dehydrated, and got a phone call in the morning to go over, and her organs were all failing. So it brought back a lot of memories from Dave, and I was a bit like that. So rang her brother and her sister and stuff to come, and she started fitting, and so they then told her they thought she had a thing called TP something. I think what it's called.
Is that like a mild stroke?
No, it's this really, really long name, and it basically your blood starts to clot.
Oh.
So it can't get to the organs. There's like a 1 in 1 million chance of people getting it.
Of course, of course it's going to be a
normally people that are pregnant. I was like, well, she's either not telling us something or...
That's a miracle.
So they said, we're going to take her and do like dialysis basically on her blood. So we were like, right, okay. So they took her off. We went and followed. We were in the waiting room in intensive care, and they came in and said she had cardiac arrest on the table and died.
I'm so sorry. You've experienced such enormous tragedies in your life.
So that was a real shock because it just wasn't expected.
No, and you just think, life, give me a break.
Yeah. And then we lost Dave's mum 2 years ago. She died the same day to almost the time that the crane fell down.
That's spooky, isn't it?
Yeah. They'd rung me and said she'd got a bag for life, as the kids called it, because she had cancer, but they caught it really early, so they didn't have to do anything other than this bag. And she'd got a blockage in there. I'd had dinner with her on the Thursday night. She ended up in hospital and she'd got this blockage. So I'd been to see her on the Tuesday. She went in on the Monday. I'd been to see her on the Tuesday, and they thought they'd sorted it out, and she wasn't blocked. And we were having a good giggle. She loved a pint of Stella, Dave's mum. And I was like, do you want a drink? And she goes, I'd love a pint of Stella. And I was like, yeah, you can't have that. So I went and got some juice and stuff and spent a bit of time with her. And then I think she died it must have been Thursday, literally. Dave's sister rang me and said, she's really not doing very well. I think you ought to come over. So I got in the car, started driving. Dave's brother rang me. He didn't even make it to the hospital, and he went, she's gone. And I looked at the clock, and it was literally about the same time.
Natalie, how do you... I mean, I know there's some time has passed now, but having all of these tragedies happen to you at a relatively young age, how did you find the strength to kind of just keep going?
I think the children.
Yeah.
You have to. What other choice do you get?
How are the children now?
They're okay.
They're not children anymore, they're young adults.
No, they're 20 and 18, so they are okay. They're both doing really, really well. Dave would be immensely proud of them both, how they've handled things and how they are in life. They've both passed their driving test. Charlie's got a lovely girlfriend. He's passed his bricklaying apprenticeship, and Dave would love that because he would always say, yeah, get a trade, son. He's done, and he's severely dyslexic, bless him. So
for him to have achieved all of that despite...
Yeah, it's not been easy. And yeah, he struggled at school. He got bullied at school for Dave dying.
Oh, kids are little bastards, aren't they?
Not sure how you can bully someone. To the extent this boy was sending TikToks to him saying, where's your dad, man? Run away with a black man.
Oh.
Or why don't you go and run to your dad and cry? Oh, no, you can't, can you? Because he's dead.
Why are they so... you have to kind of think, oh, well, they must have gone through something terrible themselves to be this horrible. But actually, you're still upsetting my kid, so screw you, kid.
So I had great satisfaction because school were like, well, he's just disruptive. He's this. No, he needs help.
Yeah, this kid
needs
need
support.
Help. Yeah.
So when he got offered his job to do his apprenticeship and stuff, I had great satisfaction.
Good.
Yeah, and he's smashed that. He drives, he's done that. Maisie, dragon boats, and Dave would have been really
Sorry,
proud
what,
of this.
dragon boats?
Dragon boats.
Amazing.
So they're like massive big boats with a
Yeah.
dragon on the front, and they paddle. So she does that. So she started doing it.
How
just
did she get into that?
She did a scout session
And just loved it.
and absolutely loved it.
This
So
is the
she's been
beauty of things
doing
like
that.
scouts, isn't it? Because they try things that you
Yeah.
would never think to offer to them.
So I think she did her first race when she was 10, maybe 11, because Dave came to watch the first race. So he would be so proud of her, still did. I mean, she's got a Blue Peter badge. They were on Blue Peter doing it.
Oh,
and
Blue
stuff.
Peter badge, jealous. I
Yeah.
never got one.
I know, I didn't either. Yeah, so they are both, they struggle. And the inquest we found really, really hard because it brought back a lot of memories, a lot of emotions.
And things that they
both,
wouldn't have been able to understand 8
Yeah.
years ago because they were so
And-
little.
Yeah, and they wanted to come to it. And I was like, no, I don't want you to. But I was like, I can't stop you. You're adults. You can both drive. There's nothing stopping you getting in the car and driving up there yourselves. But I negotiated with them and I was like, look, I don't want you to hear things. So I'll do you a deal that if you don't come, you can come up for the last day for the verdict.
Yeah,
So that's what they did.
yeah.
And I'm really pleased we didn't because, you know, we got post-mortem results. We got
Yeah, you don't want them.
and everyone, you know, everybody, so many people were interviewed and stuff like that about it. And as I say, we found out a lot that we didn't know. And also I didn't want them to sit there for 6 days looking at the people from the company,
No.
to be fair.
No, and it's a, let's be honest, but it's a bit quite boring as well. I've had to go to
Oh,
the
God,
inquest for Ben, and I went to the other divers who'd been lost off the same boat, not in the same accident, but
yeah.
there were three deaths. And I felt it, much like you must have felt with the families of those other men. You feel the solidarity with them. You know, I went, and they couldn't come. One was American, one was French. So I sort of went in their place. They never asked me to, but I felt a sort of duty to do it.
Yeah,
Well,
I didn't want to miss any of it. I was
no,
like,
I needed to be there. Yeah,
I am sitting through all
Yeah.
of that. And the kids were really brave because they came up for the last day and we went and had lunch afterwards with Dave's brother and sister-in-law. And they asked if they could see the site. So we then went to site and we put some flowers down for all three of them that had died.
yeah. That's so
And
kind that you did that.
They were really brave. And I think what they found hard, or especially Charlie, was they just built on it.
Yeah.
3 people died and they've still built what they were building. And I was like, but they will. Their lives go on.
Yeah.
I said, it's not to them. It's just, I said to them, it was probably an inconvenience because they had to stop work for
Yeah,
a week or so
yeah.
while they cleared the site. I said, but it does. Life
That's harsh
just
reality,
goes
isn't it, of life
on.
carrying on?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shame, but it happens, doesn't it? Everybody's life carries on. Whereas you don't feel like yours will. But...
Well, Natalie, that was incredible. You have told me your story so beautifully and so candidly, and I love the way that you've painted this really beautiful picture of Dave as the man, not Dave who died in a tragic accident, Dave the man who made everybody laugh. And I personally will never get the image of a nurse straddling him in a hospital out of my head, and I didn't know the man, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and he always is, you know, he'll always be a massive part of our lives. He's still talked about, I've got a new partner, and we all sit at the dinner table and we all talk about him, and Charlie is the split.
Is he?
Him. Yes. Even like mannerisms, and I find that really weird.
Because how have they learned that, right?
Yeah. And Maisie and I sit there laughing and just going, oh my God, yeah, it's just something that he would have said.
But I do this with my kids, and I think sometimes people think that to talk about the person that died, it's got to be a really serious, you know, how are you conversation.
No.
I think laughing about stupid things they did, ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's how you keep them alive.
Yeah. And I'm really lucky, like Dave's family is still a massive part of our life. And they've accepted my new partner and they adore him.
And congratulations to you too, because it's no mean feat putting yourself back out there again.
I actually feel more sorry for him. I do.
Well, yeah,
he deserves a medal.
Taking on a widow, Godspeed, my friend.
He does deserve a medal. But yeah, they've accepted him. You know, we went and had dinner last week with Dave's brother and sister-in-law, and just the 4 of us, and it was lovely. We still spend Christmas together. It's my birthday next week. They're over for my birthday, and so I am.
For next week.
Thank you. I'm still very, very lucky that I've got them all in my life.
But again, I say that probably speaks volumes about you. take some credit for
I just
that.
looked at my phone this morning because I had a few drinks last night with some friends. So I sent a message to Dave's sister-in-law going, I love you so much.
I miss a drunk I love you message.
And I'm so lucky to have you in my life.
I was a bugger for it. I used to ring people as well. Your phone would go at 3:00 and it'd be me trying to tell you I love you. Jesus Christ. Thank God that's over.
She messaged back. She did message back. She went, well, I'm not drunk and I love you too.
Oh, there you go. Right. That's very sweet. Well, Nat, I wish you and your family so much happiness and love as you kind of navigate the future. You certainly deserve it, my friend. You really, really do. And if anybody listening out there has been affected by Nat's episode, please do get in touch with me. You can find me at widowed_AF on Instagram, and the website is widowedaf. And if you want to speak to Nat direct, message me and I can pass things on to you. Fine. But thank you for sharing that with me and with our listeners, because, it was a really, really beautiful and powerful episode. And I feel very honoured that you came to talk to me.
No, thank you.
You take care of yourself.
So,
all right?
Thank you.
And for those of you out there listening, you take care of yourselves and each other. And I will be back with you next week with another tale from the forefront of widowhood. Lots of love. Bye-bye.